Here are our panelists. We've got Danette Howard from the Lumina Foundation, Alan Delong from Bates and the Center for Purposeful Work, and then Scott Carlson, senior writer from the Chronicle of Higher Education. And we are going to be talking a little bit about access and diversity and the stuff that they're working on. So maybe a quick starter, just can each of you give kind of 2 to 3 sentences on the stuff you're working on and what you're most excited about in terms of access and equity and your point of view there, so we can orient the room.
Go ahead.
Yep. Good morning. My name is Alan Delong, and I work at Bates College, which is in Lewiston, Maine. I am the Associate Dean for Purposeful Work. Purposeful Work is a way that we have reimagined what might be a traditional career center at a college or a university, and it really is working to help students think about the world of work, integrating their skills, interests, values. Brandon has set us up really nicely in terms of this liberal arts conversation, we really, at Bates, have oriented ourselves to say that the liberal arts can be part of the conversation about the emerging world of work.
Good morning. At Lumina Foundation, we're committed to making sure that more individuals have the opportunity to earn high-quality post-secondary credentials that will allow them to lead thriving lives, but also to ensure that our economy and our world remains competitive and successful. And we know that we can't have that conversation about high-quality credentials without getting really serious and focused about equity, because there are such really significant gaps between who has access to those credentials. So we can't only talk about access, but we have to talk about access for whom and access to what. And as we discuss those high impact practices like semester-long research experiences and internships and study abroad, when you begin to disaggregate those data, there are real differences between who gets to take advantage of those experiences and then what those individuals don't have access to because they never had the opportunity to engage in those types of experiences. So Lumina really wants us to have a comprehensive conversation so that everyone can have that opportunity for a thriving life.
I'm Scott Carlson from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Technically I cover the cost and value of college, although I write about a whole slew of things. I've been at that paper for about 20 years. Brandon and I had dinner in Minneapolis, about 6 years ago, something like that, and we really hit it off on a lot of things. And a lot of what he talks about, or just talked about, are things that I write about for the Chronicle. Future of Work was one of the reports I did, but I'm also writing about the position of colleges and universities in society today, particularly in cities and so on. My last report was about that. So.
Great. So my question to you guys is, as you are approaching kind of this changing needs of the workforce and how we educate people over their lifetimes to gain skills, from each of your points of view, what do you think are the levers that have the most potential for change, for getting more students through, happier lives, developing better skills? What are the kind of things that you see that say, yeah, this is what we should be as a group here thinking about, focusing on, working towards?
Go ahead.
Wow.
I hate going first.
Right, like in 2 minutes. Here we go. So I'll talk a bit about a project that Bates did with Gallup that was released, and I'm happy to share this widely, just last year. So in terms of, we talk about helping students find purpose and meaning in their work. And we do that not in a way that is like about feeling good about your work. We joke that it's not about like do-gooder work. It's about finding something, a place in the work world that plays to your strengths, your interests and values, that those things align. So what we found is that 4 key experiences can help people find that in the workforce when we're thinking about higher education. One is an applied experience. So it's a job shadow, it's an internship, it's some of the things that Brandon was talking about. I guess not a work-study job. That doesn't seem to add value. Number 2 is that the student connects with a mentor over the course of their education. And this, I'm using Bates as a model, but this could happen across institutions. so that the student can talk to that person about goals and aspirations. The third thing is that that person, that mentor, will help the student develop realistic expectations about employment prospects, so that the student understands what do I need to do while I'm here to prepare myself for the world of work. And the fourth thing is to engage in coursework that helps students think about the work world, meaning and work. I'll give one quick example. We have almost 50% of the faculty at Bates do what are called infused courses, work-infused courses. So at some point over the semester, they will pause and talk about the application of the discipline-based skills being developed or the course material and how that applies to the world of work. And that's not just in the sciences. The example I always use is we have a course called Medieval Manuscripts. So there is no more liberal arts course than medieval manuscripts. And that faculty member stops during the middle of the semester, brings in an archivist, a curator, and an illustrator to talk about the application of the course material to the world of work.
Interesting. Yeah, great.
I think that something that we all really need to think about are the pathways. And the reason that the pathways are so important from my perspective is we have to acknowledge that today's students are a very diverse group, and their pathways are not necessarily straightforward. They're very circuitous. And when you think about the population of today's students, you understand that we need a lot of different kinds of pathways to make sure that they can get to the end point and to their desired destination. So today's students, many do not start college right after high school. In fact, just a few interesting stats, nearly 40%, 37% are older than 25 years old. 46% or over 7 million are first-generation students. 40% work full-time. So oftentimes when we think about students working, we think, oh, they're working 10 hours a week on campus. No, almost half of students are working full-time to sustain themselves and their families. And the question was asked, well, what do students want and what do parents want for their students? Well, what about students who are parents themselves? 25% of today's learners are student parents. And so we need pathways, options, opportunities that are going to allow those learners who know that they need credentials to ensure that they have a high quality of life to get the credentials. And so that may mean starting with a certificate or a certification that can then lead to an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree if they so choose to pursue that. But we never want a student to have a credential that will lead to a dead end so that they can't go on to further education. And then those partnerships that we heard about this morning are absolutely key. So employers provide more of an investment in education, skill development, and training than does the U.S. Department of Federal Education through grants and loans. So if you think about that, all the money that employers invest in education and training equals to more than the Department of Education invests in loans and grants. And so we have to have a system that allows all of that skill development and education and training that's happening in the workspace. If it can be validated, and if it can be translated into competencies to also count toward credentials, so that students don't have to do double duty. So they get this skill development at the workplace, and then they have to go to courses to prove that they already know, to prove what they already know and have learned in work. So these pathways are key, and I hope that as a community and as a nation, we can have a real conversation about how to develop these robust pathways that are in the end going to benefit the learners, but also the employers, and I believe the educational institutions.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree that the integration of work and learning is a key essential part of this conversation. I also agree that being able to stack whatever credentials you earn is absolutely vital. One of the trends in my lifetime, the wage premium associated with a college degree has doubled. That what that means is that the amount of money that you get paid above and beyond a person who has just graduated from high school, no more, if you have a college degree, that amount of money has doubled over time. And it's doubled not because college graduates get paid so much more than they used to. That line is actually flat. It's doubled because people who only have a high school degree get paid so much less. So essentially, we've put a pay-to-play barrier on the employment market to some extent. And what you said about, different kinds of pathways, different kinds of people going to college, colleges, in order to survive today, have to attract new audiences, new kinds of students. These students that are coming with all these kinds of challenges, all these other burdens. And what you find is often they are dropping out, not because they can't handle the coursework, but because they have, gas, food, rent, childcare, all that other stuff gets in the way. So these are some of the things that we need to address. Part of what we talked about on the phone prior to this conversation was, sort of the pipeline problem. High schools are now so oriented toward sending everyone to college or being oriented toward a kind of college path. I think that needs to be broken up to some extent. We need to validate different kinds of pathways in heading toward whatever comes after high school. And I think that we also need to, in addition to validating these kinds of different things, using these sort of formative years in elementary school, middle school, high school, to try to find the different kinds of talents that students have and try to sort of set them on the path. Too often I find in writing about the future of work and so on, I'm talking to students who get to their second, third, fourth year in college and still really don't have a real sense of what they're talented at, what they think they're going into, what that actually looks like or what that actually feels like. I was just telling a story today to my table mate over there about renting a car from Enterprise recently. Enterprise is one of these companies that sort of requires you to have a degree to rent cars to people. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. I think that's problematic. But the woman that I was renting a car from, she had graduated from Towson University with a degree in education. And I said, how did you come to work for Enterprise? And she said, I thought I always wanted to be a teacher, went into the education program, started teaching for 3 months. After 3 months, I discovered I hated it. And so I work here now. I consider that a big problem for Towson University. And I noticed that she had a ring on her finger, actually. So I said, well, what's your husband do? And she said, well, actually, he also had an education degree from Towson University, went into teaching, discovered he hated it, and he drives trucks now that recycle oil. So, this kind of thing, it can't happen in colleges anymore. It shouldn't be happening on the pathway out of college. Colleges, high schools and colleges should be talking to their students seriously about what are the different things you can do? What are you actually talented at? What do you think is a good pathway for you? And then let's experiment. Let's try it out.
My question back then follow up to you, Scott, is, you've been writing a lot about the kind of ROI of education. When you're looking at somebody in that situation, what would you go back to the younger version of that couple and say as they're evaluating? They clearly thought, I'm getting my degree, I'm going to come out, everything's going to be great, and didn't have a moment of kind of debating this. And do you have any advice as we sort of think about how we might go forward having more of these kind of checkpoints or?
Yeah, I think a big part of the issue here, and I'm just sort of thinking on the fly, but a big part of the issue here is this drive toward college, and that being sort of the default mode. And what you're finding, what I'm finding too, talking to a lot of administrators at colleges, is that they're saying we're finding a surprising number of students who have gone through high school and are going through college. They're about to graduate, and they've never had a job. I mean, not even working at a pizza place, an ice cream shop, anything. They've never had a job. And that's in part happening because the employers aren't really hiring teenagers in the way that they used to, like when I was a kid. That's in part happening because there's all this pressure associated with get great grades in high school, do some activities, work toward getting in debates. What were the stats about getting in debates that we talked about?
Yeah, I'm really glad you teed that up. So we have 500 spots for an entering first-year class. We had 8,000 applications for 500 spots last year. And this is not extraordinary in our conference in New England.
I was talking to a guy from UT yesterday who said that when he graduated from high school 25, 30 years ago, UT would get 13,000 applications, would accept 12,000 of those kids, and 7,000 would enroll. Today, they get 50,000 applications. So the pressure associated with getting into college, which I said is that pay-to-play barrier for the workforce, is huge, and the problems associated with failure are huge. So you have a number of students. We've had all this coverage recently about the mental health of young people. I mean, look at what's happening in the workforce. Lots of automation, lots of uncertainty. And then you add to that, the uncertainty of, am I going to get into the college I want to get into? Is that going to set me up for life or not? That prevents these students from taking risks or taking that risk-taking mindset that becomes so valuable in the workplace.
Yes, and when you talk about validating all sorts of different pathways, beginning at the high school level, I think that's absolutely true, because some people might go, toward a 4-year degree, and that's really not what they want to do or what they need in order to enter the profession that they're ultimately going to pursue. But what we need to be mindful of as we talk about those different sorts of pathways is not channeling certain kids into certain pathways while others get the opportunity to pursue their life streams, whatever that might be, and to do all of that exploration that's associated with that. And so I just think we need to be able to hold both parts of that conversation.
Because the tracking problem was problematic by race and class in the past.
Absolutely. And I don't think that we want to look up one day and realize that we've actually reinforced a 2-tier system when we thought we were doing good. The other is, this idea of having real-world work experience, so you don't get to the point that you have a degree in education and then realize that you actually don't like children, for example. So, how can we ensure that all students are able to have those relevant experiences when they have to work a full-time job at the same time? So this is where that conversation around equity comes into play. And when you think about, let's say, the most lucrative internship experiences that then lead to that wonderful first job, many of them are unpaid internships. So how do we have these conversations across our campuses and all sorts of different campuses? Because we also know that the kind of institution that you attend also plays into your ability to have these amazing experiences too. So it's a very complex conversation that I hope we'll continue to have.
Excuse me, and so at Bates, we're doing this 2,000 students at a time, and I know that there's a question about how scalable this is or across platforms of different types of institutions, but we have a job shadow program. We have 300 job sites around the country that allow students to go into a place of work for one day. So that might help with students who are working. And what we ask them our model is exploration, reflect, and then test. And we want students to go through that over and over and over again. And so when they get back from those job shadows, we not only ask, what did you do or what did you learn, but what type of transportation did you take to get there? What was the environment like? Did you like it? Did that resonate with you? We have this great slide, if I were doing a presentation right now, of this student who took a job shadow on a farm, and one career he's ruled out, farming. So we really count those as wins when students come back and say, nope, that's not for me. Teaching, not for me. Farming, not for me. And we want them to drill through as many of those 300 experiences as they can in the course of their 4 years.
Have you had either of you seen other examples? I think that's a great one, where it's a day, you get a taste, enough of a taste to make a decision and eliminate potentially more than love, but who knows? Where solutions might lie,
there's a program out of University of Oregon called the Sustainable Cities Initiative, which I think is one of the best things I've seen. And what they did, the way that this got started was there were these architecture professors of architecture and urban planning, who got together at the end of one semester, and they're sort of sitting around and griping about their students and what they saw that semester. And they said, we got all these great ideas that came in these final projects, these papers and so on. And most of those students didn't even want those papers back. They just took them and they threw them in the garbage. Got the A or B or whatever they got and then just walked away. And they said, what a waste of time and money that is. So what they did is they set up this program where they contacted other departments in the university and said, look, we'll take care of all of the logistics around this. You just keep teaching what you're teaching, but we're going to find practical applications for what you're teaching. And then they form a partnership with one city a year or a public agency a year in Oregon, somewhere in Oregon. And then they'll bring in the journalism students who will talk about communication and work on a sort of a consulting form with the city or this public agency around communications, signage, urban planning, environmental remediation, all these kinds of different things. The students I talked to said, this has been the most meaningful experience I've ever had in my college experience. In fact, one design student I talked to, she said, I had this sort of epiphany where I was designing this sign for Springfield, Oregon, and I was talking to one of the traffic engineers, and he said, that's a great looking sign. How would we bolt that to the post that goes into the ground? And she said, I never even thought that you had to bolt this anywhere. It seems like such an academic problem. But that actually is one of the best things I've seen around that.
I was just reflecting on my own experience as a student. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, if there are any lawyers in the room, and did an internship the year before my senior year at the Court of Appeals and realized I cannot do this for the rest of my life. And I've always thought, man, I should have done that earlier, but it's actually a win that I did it then and didn't pursue that career. So thank you for helping me realize that all these years later. We do quite a bit of work with some large employers that are starting to develop robust partnerships with key university partners to ensure that the training that they are providing for their employees is able to apply directly toward an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. So one of the employers that we're working with applies up to 64 their training applies for up to 64 credit hours toward a degree. So that means that those individuals who are going to be able to both advance on their job will also be making great headway toward that credential that they know that they need. So this is the real worker-learner model where an individual doesn't have to choose between, hey, am I going to be able to make the time to pursue this degree because I have to work, but they're able to use the competencies that they've been able to gain while working and to apply them toward that credential that's also going to help them advance. And so we need to see many more models like this and really many more employers who are able to step up and develop these partnerships.
I mean, the apprenticeship programs are really starting to get a lot of buzz, even if they're not going quite the same way that they should. But Colorado has been doing a lot of stuff around that, and it's the interesting thing about that is that it's now apprenticeships were traditionally thought of as things for the trades, carpentry, welding, all that kind of thing. But you find more and more sort of white collar positions now that are looking toward apprenticeships. The insurance industry is one in particular that has really looked at that as an option.
I think in education, particularly higher education, we need to get better at asking for money. For internships, for paid internships. Someone mentioned unpaid internships. So if there is in fact a great need in the workforce, we need to say to the people who have those needs, you need to pony up some dollars in order to create those applied experiences. So at Bates, we have a really robust internship program. We also we raise money for unpaid internships because sometimes students need an internship in their backyard. They need to live at home during the summer, so they might be able to find an internship on their own, but it's unpaid. So we'll give them $4,000 for the summer. That's the price tag for us. For 300 hours of work, that's the contract. And we say to the employers first, bring your checkbook if you'd like to have a Bates student in your company this summer. And if you're unable to do that, particularly with community engaged places, they can't afford the $4,000 over the summer, we will do that. And we work really hard with alumni and parents to raise those monies. I know not every place can do that, but earlier someone talked about the number of tech companies that are here in Austin. And so to develop a relationship with them and say, could you commit X amount of dollars every year to hosting one of our students in your workplace, which develops that pipeline. And something that you mentioned earlier that the thread I don't want to miss out on is about social connections or professional connections for students who are first in their family to go to college. They don't have a professional network often. Sometimes they do. And they can develop them through those job shadows, through those internships, through their place of higher education, and we need to acknowledge that, right? Like, so giving them the information and the skills is only part of the equation. That there's a part that is also about professional networking, and we need to help students realize that's a thing, and that it's not somehow subversive in terms of, or a hookup in terms of getting a job, and that they need to use those networks.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think that sounds like a wonderful program. I would say that we also need to think about how students who are, say, at community colleges, where the vast majority of students who are, adult learners, low-income students, students of color can also have somewhat of maybe a similar experience, or if not exactly the same, some key tenets of that kind of experience, because we know those institutions don't have major donors. They don't have necessarily the parental network that can contribute to those kinds of special programs, but we also need for those students to be well equipped to enter the workforce and for the future world of work.
Be thinking of ways to make those bridges across. Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say Colgate is another place that does this sophomore connections program, which I think is really interesting, and I think it could be replicated by community colleges or big state universities. And basically what it is at the sophomore year, which is crucial, it's not the junior year, it's not the senior year, it's the sophomore year. You've had a taste of college, but you've got a lot left to go. They hold a kind of 2 to 3 day event where they invite alumni to come to campus, and they set up these sorts of panels all around campus. And if you're interested in getting into media, if you're interested in getting into healthcare, if you're interested in getting into law or whatever, journalism, you as a student can pick 3 of these, and then you spend your day going to each one of these sessions, and you can ask anything you want. What do you get paid? How'd you get in? What do I need to know? What's the job market like? And then they have a sort of reception at the end of the day, where then the students can walk up to these people that they met during the day and say, hey, here's my card, or here's my name, what should I do now? Can I call you? Do you know anybody I can talk to? That kind of thing.
So thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.